Yes, we are starting a new week here. The sun did come up, the calendar did flip over, and it is Monday, October 3rd, and we're back with a new edition of the Morning Pit. I said on the Panther-Lair post-game show Saturday night that we would continue doing the Morning Pit. One loss, or two now as it may be, wasn't going to dissuade us from doing our weekly Morning Pit show here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and I think that goes without saying. I mean, the coverage rolls on no matter what happens with the team. That's why we went live for a post-game show at around like 1:30 in the morning on Saturday night, or early Sunday morning, depending on how you look at it. It's why we'll continue doing these, daily shows here, these Morning Pit shows on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's why we'll continue doing the live Panther-Lair show every Wednesday night and post-game shows every week. It's why we'll continue doing all of these things, because the coverage doesn't stop no matter what the results are. And we knew there would be a loss. We knew there would be a loss at some point in these next 8 games, these final 8 games on the regular season schedule. I talked about it during the week last week as we started talking, particularly on the Wednesday night show, and then I think I talked about it during some of the Morning Pit episodes throughout the week, as we talked about the prospects for Pitt over the course of the rest of the season. As we sort of sat on that precipice of the ACC schedule beginning. We said, what can these next 8 games really bring? What can you expect out of Pitt in these next 8 games? And I put up a poll on Twitter. What do you think the record is going to be in these 8 games? And I put 4 options: 5-3, 6-2, 7-1, 8-0. 70% of the people who responded, and there were like 1,600 or 1,700 people who responded, 70% of them said 7-1 or 8-0. These were the expectations, or at least this was the expectation of a certain segment of the fan base who decided to vote in a Twitter poll. And I said last Wednesday night, and I think I said it at other points during the week, and it's something I've talked about in the past, it's hard to win that many games in a row. If Pitt somehow won out and went 8-0 in the ACC against the schedule that they were facing, that would have been 10 wins in a row, counting the Western Michigan and Rhode Island game. They'd be on a 10-game winning streak. 10-game winning streaks don't tend to happen for teams that occupy the tier that Pitt is in college football. Maybe for some of that upper echelon elite top 5 program, those teams can sometimes put together a winning streak like that. You'll have the 14 or 15-0 season, or the 12-0 regular season, or even an 11-1 season that has a 10-game winning streak in there at some point. But if you're in the tier that Pitt's in, which is not the bottom tier by any stretch of the imagination, it's an above, it's a top half tier, I think, of Power 5 schools and FBS schools. It's very hard to win that many games in a row. This is not all setting up to be a defense of Saturday's debacle, because I will use that word debacle and stunner and disappointment and brutal loss and all those terrible adjectives and nouns that we can come up with to describe what was ultimately a very, very bad loss. And I said it even before the game that it would be a very, very bad loss if they were to lose to Georgia Tech with all the circumstances surrounding that program. And so we're not setting up for the payoff here, the kicker here, to be a defense of that loss. That's not the case. But we all said, or I said, and I think a lot of people agree, that there would be a loss at some point in these 8 games. Maybe more than one. Now I think probably people would say they are leaning toward more than one, in the wake of Saturday's game. But we said there would be a loss in there. Some point, Pitt would stumble. It's very hard to win that many games in a row. It's very hard to go that many games in a row and play at a certain level and avoid mistakes, or be talented enough to overcome those mistakes, week in, week out, and win that many consecutive games. It's very difficult to do that. And most teams are unable to do that. At some point, they stumble. At some point, they run into an obstacle, often of their own creating, that they can't overcome. It's normal. For Pitt, the Miami game. Obviously, the Western Michigan game comes to mind, but the Miami game was probably that one in the middle that they made too many mistakes and they just weren't quite talented enough to overcome them. Whether it was missed tackles, whether it was interceptions and turnovers, or whether it was a terrible play call of the Pitt special play with Lucas Krull trying to throw a touchdown pass. They just weren't good enough to overcome that many mistakes. Maybe in Alabama or Georgia or whoever, Ohio State can overcome those mistakes, but Pitt cannot. And so at some point that catches up with you. and you have a loss. So it was never a question of whether they were going to lose a game in these final 8 regular season contests, these 8 ACC games. It was more a question of who they would lose to and how they would lose and what would ultimately be their undoing. That was what we didn't know, and that was what we were waiting to find out. And we found out on Saturday. On Saturday, the answer was laid bare, and the problems were laid out for all to see, and leaving very little in doubt about the state of this team and the prospects for this team going forward. And we talked about this on Saturday night. Maybe you didn't stay up late and join us on the live stream. A lot of people did. We had a great turnout, actually. This is the second time in 5 games we've had one of these primetime games, West Virginia being the first, and we had a great turnout on the postgame show. So if you're ever debating it and you're still up at like 1 a.m. after a primetime game, that's the place to go hang out with other Pitt fans. And certainly if it's more of a regular start time, you should make time for that and come hang out on the post-game show. We talked about it then, and really the conversation after the game on Saturday night, which carries over to now, is a conversation that started a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And it's a conversation that's been building and a discussion that's been building and a topic that's been looming out there. I can't say lurking. It's hanging over everything since the start of the season, or even dating back to, Jordan Addison's transfer, Kenny Pickett's, running out of eligibility, Mark Whipple's, departure from Pitt. All of those things sort of created this question around what Pitt's offense was going to be in the post-Pickett, post-Addison, post-Whipple world, and how it was going to carry over the success. And we saw all the parties that they brought in, all the people who were hired, and all the transfers who were acquired, and the players who were expected to elevate their level of play and to step into some of those bigger roles. We knew all those pieces. We knew what we were hearing about it. We knew what the expectations were for that group. But we didn't know what it was actually going to be, and it was the biggest question of the offseason. And I boiled, all offseason, I boiled the question down to Kedon Slovis himself. I said it's all going to come down to how well Kedon Slovis plays. But this is college football, and no man is an island. And I shouldn't even say it's college football. It's football. And it's very difficult for one guy to really be the difference like that. And you need help, and you need the other players to step up. And you need the other players to do their part as well. They need to be reliable, and you need to be able to count on them to deliver. And thus far, through 5 games, which is damn near the halfway point of the season, nobody's been good enough. Nobody has been at the level they need to be for this team to win. And that's Slovis, and that's Frank Signetti, and that's Kanate Mumfield, and Bub Means, and Jared Wayne, and Jaden Bradley. I can't really throw Jalen Barden in there because who knows where he is. I mean, I guess perhaps by virtue of his absence, we can conclude that maybe he's not doing what he needs to do. I'm not really sure, because he seems like he could be a playmaker for this offense, and yet he can't buy a snap out there. The offensive line hasn't played up to the level it needs to play at. I would say Gavin Bartholomew's been pretty good when he's gotten an opportunity to be, but no one has been at the level they need to be. And so these questions that formed in the offseason, these questions that carried into the early weeks of the season, and then kind of, I can't say they got tabled, but we got sort of these temporary answers or temporary stays on these questions when Kedon Slovis got hurt and couldn't play in the second half against Tennessee, didn't play at all against Western Michigan. But then he came back in the Rhode Island game. And this really stands as a touchstone moment for me. It really does. And I talked about it so much last week. I mean, we were ahead of this story. I think we really kind of addressed a lot of things last week here on the Morning Pitt, on the Wednesday night Panther-Lair show, and on the message boards and different content we put out at Panther-Lair.com. We really addressed this question of offensive identity, of who this Pitt offense is, who they want to be, who they can be, who they are, and maybe even either in tandem with that, or even more than that, we asked the question of what are they really capable of? How good can they actually be? And I come back to that Rhode Island game as such a missed opportunity where this team could have used, in this offense, and this quarterback, and these receivers, and this offensive coordinator could have used that game to really try to get into a rhythm with the passing game. And this is not just in retrospect. If you watch the post-game show last Saturday from that Rhode Island game, if you watch some of the Morning Pitt episodes last week, it was a week ago today. It was last Monday. You can go back and look at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Right there, you go back and look, whatever that date would have been, the final Monday in September, you look at the video, and the question right there in the headline, what is Pitt's offensive identity? And a few hours after we released that video, I went down to the South Side for Pat Narduzzi's weekly press conference and asked, what is the offensive identity? Do you feel like with the quarterback situation, you feel like you haven't been able to really kind of figure that out yet? And Narduzzi's answer was a coach's answer of what you would expect. Of, I think we have our identity, we do this and that. Or I think you saw it in the second half of the West Virginia game and the first half of the Tennessee game, which was something I was operating. I was operating on that assumption, I guess. That, all right, because Kedon Slovis got hurt, we've been limited in what we've been able to see of this offense sort of operating at full strength. But the best examples we have of maybe what this offense wants to be or what it can be was right in that stretch of 4 quarters of the second half of the West Virginia game, first half of the Tennessee game. But that's what they can be. That's what they can do. That's what they want to be, and that's what they want to do when Kedon Slovis is healthy and everybody's playing. Okay. But the problem is he didn't play for the next game and a half. And when he did come back, finally in the Rhode Island game, they ran the ball like crazy, which they should be able to do it against Rhode Island. But the passing game was not... It was not used in that game the way I would have used it. And I shouldn't say the way I would have used it. Who cares what I would have done? But if you look at the usage where something like close to half the passes, or maybe more than half the passes Slovis threw were behind the line of scrimmage in that Rhode Island game, are you really developing the timing and getting the progress and development out of your downfield passing game and your intermediate passing game even that you needed to have before you dove into ACC play? Now, brand new offensive coordinator, brand new offense, brand new quarterback, brand new receivers, all of this new stuff. You needed as much of a warm-up as you could get, and you didn't. The schedule didn't give it to you. The schedule didn't give it to you right off the bat. The schedule gave you West Virginia and Tennessee right off the bat. So here, break in your new offense and your new quarterback and your new coordinator and your new receivers. Break them in against a pair of Power 5 opponents. One of them who is foaming at the mouth to try to beat you because they haven't played you in 12 years, and the other one who's looking for a little bit of revenge, as well as a road win over a ranked opponent. Go break in your new offense and your new coordinator and your new quarterback and your new receivers in that scenario. It was tough. And all things considered, they performed admirably. I think, we talk so much about offensive adjustments. I think you saw one sort of approach to offense in the first half of the West Virginia game, and you saw something pretty different in the second half, and might I say more effective. And I think that carried over to the Tennessee game, where they seemed to try to look for some continuity from what they did in the second half against West Virginia. And then Slovis gets hurt. There's nothing you could do about that. I mean, you could question whether or not they should have gone for it at the end of the first half, blah, blah, blah. Injuries happen. Guys miss time. So he misses a game and a half. And he comes back for the Rhode Island game. This was the game where you had an opportunity, where you should have had an opportunity to get some of those kinks worked out, to stretch out a little bit. And instead, you go into the Georgia Tech game completely cold in your passing game. And it shows. He completes, 2 of his first 9, 2 of his first 10 for 8 yards. 2 of 10 passes for 8 yards. And one of those 2 completions was a 3-yard pass to Ryan Jacoby. He's wearing number 84, but he's an offensive lineman. And the other one was like a check down pass, a 5-yard check down pass. 2 of the first 10 pass attempts. And we could talk about gloves, and he had gloves on, I think, for the first 9 of those 10 pass attempts. He had a glove on his throwing hand. He took it off, and then he got better and ended up leading a touchdown drive and all this stuff. It wasn't about gloves. It was about an offense being out of sync. Maybe a little bit about gloves, but it was about an offense being out of sync. An offense that looked disjointed. An offense where quarterback and receivers weren't on the same page. Where receivers weren't getting to the place where the quarterback needed them to be, and the quarterback wasn't delivering the ball to the places where the receivers needed it to be. Nobody was doing what they needed to do. Nobody was doing what they were supposed to do, and there were mistakes all over the place. It was disjointed. It was out of sync, and it looked like an offense that hadn't actually been run in like 3 weeks. which it was. Missed opportunity against Rhode Island. You don't take what the defense gives you against an FCS opponent. You don't take what the defense gives you against Rhode Island. You don't let an FCS opponent dictate to you. Rhode Island's taking away the deep stuff? Throw it anyway. And if you can't, then you've got some serious talent deficiencies at wide receiver, which maybe that's the case. And I say this, and I'm not gonna pretend like I didn't spend a lot of this summer hyping up Konate Mumfield and hyping up Bub Means. And some of that was based on my own observations of those guys, seeing them in training camp. Some of that was based on what they did at their previous stops. Bub Means not having a ton of production at Louisiana Tech, but the way he was used as a downfield passing target, I thought he would be really good. I thought Konate Mumfield would carry over his success from Akron. And there have been little flashes. But based on my own observations, based on what they did at their previous stops, and based on what I was hearing from people around the program who were pretty excited about the prospects for Mumfield and Means, I thought, okay, these guys are going to step in and be pretty good. They're not going to be Jordan Addison, but there's nobody's Jordan Addison. He's a great player. He's a superstar for a good reason. But these guys will be good enough. These guys will be able to make plays. And this offense might not look like last year's offense. They might not have the effective passing game like last year's offense. But when you can offset it with an effective running game, you're going to open up opportunities in the passing game. And even if you don't have Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison, you're going to be able to make plays with Keaton Slovis and Konate Mumfield because there's going to be emphasis on stopping the run since that's going to be the foundation of this offense. I thought what they might have lacked in superstar players, because they obviously had two of them last year, they could make up for with more balance in the offense that would give them more opportunities to attack and be successful and be explosive. Sort of just going at it a different way. Still with the same offensive goals of scoring a ton of points and having an explosive offense, but just going at it a different way. This is what I expected. This is what I thought was going to happen. This is what we were told was going to happen. This is what people, even aside from press conference, people said this is what it's going to look like. This is what they're going to be able to do with the players that they've got. Well, they haven't been able to do it. And maybe it turns around. Not like flip of a switch or anything like that. Maybe it improves. Okay? Everybody's sore right now. There's no question about it. Everybody's, bitter and angry about that loss. You can't help but think back to the Western Michigan game last year when the immediate reaction after that game was that Pitt's going to lose most of the remaining games because they're not going to be able to stop anybody on defense. Well, now we're coming out of this Georgia Tech game saying Pitt's going to lose a lot of the remaining games because they can't move the ball on offense. The defense obviously worked itself into shape. I think the offense can do that as well. There were more proven commodities on that defense than there are on this offense. But I think these guys have played enough. I think they've been successful enough at different points in the past that they should be able to be better than they were on Saturday. I don't think who they were on Saturday is who they're going to be for the next 7 games of the regular season. I don't necessarily know if they're going to be the team that scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and, Keaton Slovis ends up with 305 yards and 3 passing touchdowns, leads a couple, a 99-yard drive and a 68-yard drive or something like that. I don't know if they're going to do that all the time. We have to be careful about reading too much into, those final drives of the game, given how Georgia Tech was playing them defensively. But I'll say this. Keaton Slovis was attempting passes on those final 2 drives that he did not attempt earlier in the game. At all. And that is part that sort of bothers me. And I think it bothers a lot of people why these passes weren't being attempted earlier in the game. Georgia Tech knew you wanted to run the ball. They were lined up and ready to stop you from running the ball. There should have been opportunities for some of those plays. And there were different stretches where they were getting into a rhythm. The one drive, they opened it with, I think, an 11-yard pass to Mumfield and a 12-yard pass to Jared Wayne. It looks like things are grooving. And then they try to run a screen to Sibo Flemister, and it's ruled an intentional grounding on first down. The next play is Marcus Minor, has to grab a tipped pass out of the air. It ends up losing 10 yards, and now all of a sudden they're in 3rd and 29 from the 29, and the whole drive is shot. But those kinds of things, 12-yard pass, 11-yard pass, just get into a little bit of a rhythm there, just to develop it, just to get, Mumfield and Wayne and Bradley and Means just to feel the ball, to feel the ball in those areas of the field, to get Slovis comfortable dropping back and hitting those different areas of the field. It takes a little time. You're not going to do it overnight. You're not going to all of a sudden just go out there and say, all right, I knew we threw half of our passes behind the line of scrimmage last week. This week, we're shooting for like 12 to 15 yard passes, and occasionally we're going to go 20 plus. How do you think that's going to work out? I'll tell you how it's going to work out. It's going to work out that you go 2 of 10 for 8 yards on your first 10 passing attempts. And, I could be sitting here right now saying all this stuff. Pat Narduzzi or Frank Zanetti could walk in here and punch me in the face and say, you're an idiot. You have no idea what you're talking about. It doesn't. What we did against Rhode Island does not have a single bit of significance or connection to what we did against Georgia Tech. We had 10 issues on offense in the first half, and not one of them could have been resolved by trying to throw the ball a little bit more downfield against Rhode Island. And I would say, sure, you guys know more than me. You absolutely do. And I don't say that sort of sarcastically or, I'm not trying to placate any, I'm not being fatuous, Jeffrey. I just, know more. Like you do. You've watched all the film. You know what the play calls were. You know who ran the right routes. You know where the passes were. If Slovis was looking in the right place, or he set the protection to the wrong side, or he held onto the ball too long, or he wasn't looking where he was. All that. You know all that stuff. And maybe you're right. I'm willing to bet, though, that your passing game, which is still trying to develop, that took a significant, your passing game, whose development and progress took a significant hit when Kedon Slovis had to miss a game and a half in the middle of September, right? Your passing game, which is one of the biggest questions facing this team entering the season, after all the turnover that you had from offensive coordinator, quarterback, and wide receiver, I'm willing to bet that passing game could use all the work it can get. And that the more game reps you get for that passing game, the more likely you are to have success. The more likely you are to make progress. The more likely you are to move along in that process of developing cohesion. And I use that word a lot on Saturday night during the post-game show. Cohesion. Cohesiveness. This passing game did not have it for 3 quarters in this game on Saturday night. They really didn't have it until the fourth quarter when they were just flinging it all over the place, and Georgia Tech was sitting back and just trying to bleed time off the clock. They really didn't have any of that cohesiveness or that cohesion that they needed, the timing, the rhythm, the group, none of it. They looked like a team that hadn't, they looked like a group of guys out there trying to connect and play, run a passing game at the Power 5 level, but they hadn't played together in 3 weeks, because that was the reality. They hadn't tried to do those things in 3 weeks. That was the reality. And so as we talk about, and I think a lot of it falls on the receivers. I think the receivers have an issue. I think that group has left a whole lot to be desired. I think they've left a lot of plays on the field, either through drops or poor routes or not getting in the right spot. I think a lot of the issues that we are putting on Kedon Slovis probably have their root cause somewhere in that wide receiver core. Pat Narduzzi said it after the West Virginia game. He said the receivers weren't running sharp routes. They weren't getting to their spots. They weren't where they needed to be. And, even he said his initial reaction during the West Virginia game was Kedon's holding on to the ball too long. Then after he went back and, drum roll please, watched the tape, he saw that it wasn't necessarily that Slovis was holding the ball too long. It was that Slovis's targets weren't getting open. The guys weren't getting to their spots. They weren't sharp in their routes and running them the way they need to be run in order to operate a high-level passing offense. And I don't mean, Frank Zagnetti's running such a high-level passing offense. I mean, to run a passing offense at the Power 5 level, you need to execute at a certain level. And they weren't executing at a certain level. They weren't executing at a Power 5 level. They weren't executing at an ACC championship level or anything like that. And so I think there are some big issues there. I think there are some big problems in the receiving core where those guys have to be sharper. They have to be more on point. And look, the Western Michigan game was a waste for Pitt's receivers. It was a waste. Okay, they blocked. They blocked a lot. They did a great job, but they blocked a lot. And you know what? The Rhode Island game was kind of a waste too. What did you really develop there when you throw half of your passes behind the line of scrimmage? That's not the kind of offense that's going to win you games in the ACC. So what the heck are you doing wasting 60 minutes of on-field game time against another college football team throwing all these junk sideways passes when that's not going to be the bread and butter of your offense? And when you need to attack, when you need to make plays, when you need to score points, either to come back in a game or put an opponent away or just to score, just to win games and go ahead, that you're not going to be throwing 6 screen passes the Bub means to try and win games. You're going to need to be able to attack. And it doesn't have to be 70-yard bombs, but you need to be able to hit 12, 15, 18-yard passes consistently. Those are the things that are going to get you back. There was a play where they had a holding on first down. It ended up in a 1st and 20. And I marked this play. Yeah, it was, let's see. So the score was 9-7. So this was probably third quarter, I would say. And it was Pitt's third drive of the second half. And they got the ball at the 16, and first play, from the Pitt 16, Keaton Slovis throws to Gavin Bartholomew for a 12-yard gain. All right, 1st and 10 at the 28. Vincent Davis runs for 10 yards. All right, moving now. 1st and 10 at the 38. All right, Slovis drops back, throws to Mumfield for a 17-yard pass, but they call a holding penalty on Vincent Davis. All right, moves it back to a 1st and 20 from the 28. And I started this play because 1st and 20 from the 28. Screwed, right? Well, they come out, and on 1st and 20, Slovis hits Mumfield for 14 yards. And all of a sudden, 1st and 20 is 2nd and 6. And I started that play because it reminded me of last year. I distinctly remember having the impression last season, in 2021, when Pitt would face a 1st and 20, when they would have that penalty that would push them back to 1st and 20, 1st and 22, 2nd and 22, something like that, 2nd and 18. I never really felt like they were all in bad shape. I was like, oh, they'll get this. Or not like, oh, it's just a lock that they're going to convert this and get a first down eventually. But it didn't feel... There have been plenty of Pitt offenses we've seen that when they're facing 1st and 20 or 2nd and 18 or 1st and 22 or something like that, they're screwed. Drive's over. It's just a matter of how much time they can take off the clock before they punt. Last year's offense, I didn't feel that way. I said, yeah, they'll chip away. They'll get 12, 15 yards. And then they'll be in like a 2nd and manageable, 3rd and manageable situation. And that was exactly what happened here. They're on a 2nd and 6. Now, it was, they 2nd and 6 from the 42. Slovis threw down the left sideline. It was incomplete. And on 3rd down is when he was intercepted. So they didn't convert that time. But my point is that here was a situation where they were in 1st and 20 and they were actually able to make a play. So the potential's there, right? When you see plays like that. And again, that drive, 12-yard pass to Bartholomew, 10-yard run from Davis, a 17-yard pass that gets called back on a holding penalty, and so they come right back with a 14-yard pass. It's there. It's possible. They had, I think one of their touchdown drives. Yeah, it was the touchdown drive that made it 19-14. Actually, no. It wasn't the touchdown drive that made it 19. The drive with the grounding that I talked about. They started at 25, and he hits Mumfield for 11, and he hits Wayne for 12, and all of a sudden you're at the 48. Those are the kind of things they need to be able to do. They need to be able to chip away with those medium-range passes and use that plus the running game to set up some of the downfield stuff. These are things that you have to work on, that you have to get good at, and you could spend a lot of time in training camp working on it, but you need to be able to do it in the games. And I think the games are when you really can kind of get that flow and that momentum. And like I say, didn't happen against Western Michigan, didn't happen in the second half of the Tennessee game, and didn't happen in the Rhode Island game when it really could have happened. So you have 2.5 games of, for all intents and purposes, wasted opportunity. Now, yeah, they went 2-1 in that stretch. They won the Western Michigan game and Rhode Island. And if we're just outcomes based, that's all that matters. But they didn't do enough to help themselves for the next 8 games. And it came back to bite them. I think it came back to bite them on Saturday night and cost them a very winnable game. And dropped them out of the polls and took a whole lot of attention away from a team that really had and maybe even still has a chance to make noise and play as one of the better teams in the Coastal. But now they're 3-2. They're 0-1. And is it all because they didn't try to throw the ball downfield against Rhode Island? No. There were 3 turnovers. There were 12 penalties. There were actually 14 penalties. So we're going to talk about that this week because that is a big, big, big problem. But if you have any kind of offense in the first half, you probably can survive the 3 turnovers and the 12 penalties. Probably. It's going to be tough. But if you can actually do something other than punt, turnover on downs on your first 5 possessions, if you can get points out of those drives, not to mention, like Eric Hallett dropping an interception or failing to make a play, or they could have been a pick 6 and some of those other things we've talked about. Some of those missed interception opportunities early. If you're just able to score a few touchdowns on those drives, it's a different game, and you probably can weather the storm that is 3 turnovers and 12 penalties. But because you were so ineffective on offense, those mistakes, and there were a lot of them, came back to bite you. And you couldn't overcome it, and you end up losing a bad game. You had a bad loss. That is a bad, bad loss. But like I said, look, after the Western Michigan game, it was Pitt's going to go 3-9, 4-8 because they can't survive, maybe 5-7 because they can't stop anybody on defense. Well, the defense rallied and they played pretty well. Right now, Pitt's going to go 3-9, 4-8, 5-7, maybe 6-6 because they can't move the ball. They can't score on offense. Well, I still think there's enough talent. There's better talent on this team and on this offense than what they showed on Saturday. Now maybe they're going to get into a rhythm here. Maybe they'll start putting it together. But the questions we had last week about what this team's offensive identity is, I mean, to be quite honest, they better hope those questions still exist. Because if we got answers to them, if we've answered the question of what is Pitt's offensive identity, the answer is pretty bad. You better hope that question hasn't been answered. You want that one to be a TBD and not solved, I guess. Listen, make sure while you're here you like this video, subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's our YouTube channel where we do these Morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday, every day of the week. Just talking about whatever's going on in Pitt sports. We'll have plenty of stuff this week, recruiting content here on the Morning Pitt. We'll be talking about other games, what else happened in the Coastal Division and the ACC this weekend, games to watch next weekend while Pitt's hosting Virginia Tech. Other things to watch heading into that game, other big storylines about this team. We got 5 days to fill. I mean, darn, we only have 4 now because we already did Monday. And so we've only got 4 more days to fill of these Morning Pitt episodes. We will have plenty to talk about every one of those days, to be sure. So Pat Narduzzi's got his Monday press conference today. Stay tuned on Panther-Lair.com. I'll be in the South Side with all the updates from what Narduzzi has to say. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. That's right there on the message boards. I'll be posting updates from the South Side, and we'll have lots of coverage throughout the week. The season's not over. It's almost half over, but it's not over. There's still a lot of games to be played. 7 more regular season games, and who knows how many in the postseason. The goals have changed, or at least the challenges have changed. But I think this team can still accomplish a decent amount. But they have their work cut out for them, and they know what they need to work on. We all know what they need to work on. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com is where we will be discussing it and covering it all season long. And right here on the Morning Pitt is where we'll be covering it as well. So like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I hope you had a great weekend, aside from, sports. And, welcome to the new week. Hope you have a great Monday. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, for the Morning Pitt, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.